Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with a Westworld Season 2 Episode 10 prediction video. In these videos, I look at the latest trailer for the next episode of Westworld to drop and give my thoughts, theories, and predictions on what's going to happen next. Now this episode is called The Passenger. And when I think of a passenger, I think of somebody who's not in the driver's seat, who's not in control. And they are just technically a slave to the circumstances that are going to happen to them. And the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of passenger is I think of Dolores and Bernard being escorted by Logan through the forge. But I do think that there is so much more to this episode that meets the eye. We got a ton of information. And the first things we see is the journey to the valley. We see multiple groups of characters making their way to the valley beyond. We see Bernard driving the car there. And then we see him walking, probably because he can't walk any further because he's getting closer to the very hilly landscape. And then we see William standing there looking at the valley beyond in the distance. I gotta say, this kind of surprises me because last time we saw William, he did cut his wrist, but at the same time he had a horse. And it makes me even more confused because we see Dolores and William here riding a horse to his biggest mistake, to the very place he showed Dolores about his project. So at some point, probably earlier on in the episode, we're gonna see Dolores and William come together and ride their horses in to his project. And this makes sense because these characters go way back. But I will also say that this clip of Dolores and William traveling together could be one of the last scenes of Westworld Season 2. And we're actually seeing Dolores and newly printed host William riding to their new world. But I'll get more into that later. We also see Akecheta traveling with his group of hosts. He's trying to find the door to a new world. And we know that Maeve is going to break herself out of the mesa using all these bulls. And she's going to leave with Sizemore, Sylvester, Felix, Armistice, all of those characters. And she'll probably drive to meet Akecheta because we know that they're going to be together when they get attacked. And we see the attack approaching when Clementine is riding a horse and Charlotte, Stubbs, and his men are following her to the valley beyond. And what I will say is most interesting about this episode is that all of these characters are pursuing the door, but the door means many things. In a nutshell, the door is an opening between worlds. It's the connection between host and human, and that takes many forms. First, there's the physical world transition. The door opens to the human world away from the host world. And we see this in Maeve's storyline with the crack coming through the world. Once they go through that, they are free of human tampering. Their shackles are free. They've walked through the door. But then there's another door. There's body transfer. Being able to go through the door from human to host. And we're going to see William go through that storyline. And we're going to see him finally find the door that Ford always wanted him to find. It begins where he ends and it ends where he began. The story begins with the person who William became, the man in black. And the story ends with the person he began as. Himself when he first met Dolores. It's the journey of self-discovery. And thirdly, the door is going to be utilized by Dolores and Bernard. We're going to see humans in a host-simulated world, where Dolores tries to find the weapon, and it's essentially the weapon of knowledge. So let's start off with Maeve. We know that she's going to escape the mesa, and she's going to make her way to meet with Akecheta and his men. But when they're trying to open the door to this new world, Clementine is going to arrive. And I think we're going to see everyone preparing. We're going to see the Ghost Nation joining hands, hoping that they can fight the incoming threat. We see Armistice fighting, and we see Hector shooting people. And we also see Ashley loading his weapons, so we're going to be seeing a big fight unfold. And this is going to be a big scene because Clementine arrives, and we're going to start to see hosts start to turn on each other. And this may even be some hosts that we like. We might see Hector start shooting other hosts. We might see Armistice start shooting other people. And this is what puts Maeve in a heavy predicament, is she has to stop Clementine before her own people start to turn on her. But Maeve is the only person who can effectively fight Clementine. First of all, there's the obvious reason. They both have the same ability to control the mesh network. And it seems like Maeve tries to use her ability. And she may try to use this ability specifically on Clementine. And I think this is a good way Maeve can talk to Clementine, to make her realize who she is. Because Maeve and Clementine go way back. Maeve knows about Clementine's story. She knows about her family and her farm. And Maeve's time as a brothel keeper, she kind of adopted Clementine as a daughter, essentially. So I think Maeve is going to exploit Clementine's reveries. She's going to make Clementine remember her past. And we've seen this plot point hinted in earlier episodes. We see Clementine repeating the dialogue of the person she used to be. And she's obviously very emotional because she misses that side of herself. So I think, long story short, Maeve would be successful, and Clementine would stop fighting, which would result in Charlotte and Ashley retreating back to the Mesa, where it begins the present timeline that we've seen in episode 1. Charlotte returns to the Mesa where Bernard finds her. Ashley winds up on the beach where he rescues Bernard. And then I believe we're going to see the doors open. And the doors are essentially this light, projected light. And I believe that this is a projected hologram that essentially covers the whole world of Westworld. It gives you an illusion of what's in the background. It may help them control weather, because they said a couple episodes earlier that they can control the weather of the park. And once this is down, it eliminates full control the humans have over Westworld, and they can finally break free from human control. And I think what lies beyond this door is what Ford has been telling them all along. In season 1, Dolores always talks about the valley. She wants to escape to this place. And Teddy tells her about it, where the mountains meet the sea. The waters will wash the past clean off you.
You've traveled all over these parts. Isn't there anywhere we could go?
You know, there is a place I heard about down south, where the mountains meet the sea. They say the water's so pure there, it'll wash the past clean off you. And you can start again.
I'd like to go there with you.
And those waters wash you free of control. You're free to start a new life. Ford has put this in their dialogue since season 1, and I believe once the door opens, we'll see a beautiful valley. Almost like what we see in this painting. I'm sure Dolores is going to find this painting in the library inside of the forge, but I think it holds hidden meaning of what to expect when the door opens. They'll find this beautiful valley where they can start anew. But that's just the beginning, whereas later in the show, and later in the seasons, they'll have to start taking over the world. Whereas now, they're going to be free on an island. So I believe that door will open, the holograms will recede, and Maeve will be able to escape. But then I think we're going to get the last shot of the show, and I think HBO has already showed us this. We see Dolores arriving with her men in the exact same place Maeve is trying to enter the door. And she simply looks onward and says, "Our world." And I think this shot is extremely manipulated. First of all, I think this shot is not CGI'd. I think what we actually will see is Dolores staring at a beautiful valley, and they're going to add that in post. And secondly, I think Dolores is not going to be with her men. I think they staged this shot to make us believe that this was earlier in the show. Because we found out last episode that all of Dolores' men are gone. She told Teddy that they're on their own. And now Teddy killed herself, so Dolores is truly on her own. So I think all of Dolores' men are actually going to be replaced with William. I think her and William will be standing in this location looking at the valley that awaits them. And they can walk through the door to be free from humans. And I think this is going to be the last shot of the season. Because this episode is going to be very heavily focused on Dolores pursuing knowledge in the Forge. I believe after she gets that knowledge, after William makes the transition from human to host, and after Bernard floods the valley, Dolores will finally make it to the door, and that will end the season. Because it seems like these are two different locations. The door to the real world, and the door to the simulation. The second door we're going to start seeing is the door to Dolores, or the door into a host body. So I think William this whole time has been on a journey of self-discovery. He's finding who he once was, so the story ends where he began. And I think we're starting to see William get his realities mixed up, which is exactly where he needs to be because Ford is preparing him to be the first human to successfully be transferred into a new immortal host body. And his mind would actually accept this new reality because he's been conditioned to accept this reality. And William has said himself he belongs to the wrong world. He believes that he belongs in Westworld. So I believe Ford is going to give him a printed human control module where he can effectively be transferred into a host body. Because William's theory on recording people's choices is very flawed. William believes that if he watches everyone's choices, he'll get to see who they are. But William is a unique character. Because every choice William has ever made is to hide who he truly is. He's the billionaire philanthropist and good husband to hide that he belongs in the wrong world. He's the villain in the park to make Dolores suffer to hide who he truly is so he can experience that realness of the hosts that he once had with Dolores. And William is having self-identity issues because you are the choices you make. And William is losing touch with who he is because every choice that he's ever made is to hide who he truly is. So I believe that's why he's being conditioned to go through the door to become a host. If you want to know more details why, check out my video on the door to Dolores. And I know that him and Ford are at ends, but at the same time, they have the same motivations. William wants the hosts to be free, much like Ford. That's why William pursued the maze. So Ford is essentially the god of this world, and William is a guy who just wants to be a part of it. And we see that William is subject too, and that could mean that he's the subject after James Delos, who's going to go through the door into a human body. And we know that he's going to make it to the Valley Beyond because Alazzo told him he would see him there. And he was told that through Ford, which means that William's storyline essentially ends in the Valley Beyond. And that involves going through the door. So then William will be a part of the world that he always thought he belonged to. And to make it even more interesting, we see William in the Forge. We see the dimensions are different. So there are multiple ways he could have gone in there. Either he has a control module printed just for him, or he went into the cradle in a non-threatening, non-invasive way, which could be what Bernard did here. You go into the simulation without getting your head cut up. But this takes me to one scene that is really confusing me, and that's seemingly the entrance to the trapdoor which would take them to the cradle. We see Bernard there with a car behind him, seemingly stopping. We know that this isn't Bernard's car because it's not white, it's black. And then all of a sudden we see William shooting at Dolores with two horses there. Those could be the two horses that we see William and Dolores riding to the Forge. And then we see somebody dead under the tires. So the timeline on this is very confusing to me. But what we can take from this is all these characters are going to make it to this location, and we do see that all these characters end up in the Forge. And it looks like William is about to shoot Dolores. It's clear that he shoots at her in the stomach, but then he goes almost to execute her. And I believe he won't be able to do it. And I think he'll lower his weapon and let Dolores live. And that will launch William entering the cradle, finding who he truly is, and being transferred into a new body where he can go to the Valley Beyond. We even see Ford standing over a skeleton and Bernard assisting. I believe it could be multiple characters, but I think primarily this is William's body. Unless we're going to see another body that was printed in Sector 17 that we've seen has been removed, and we'll see a young William in a capsule that will be ready for old William to transfer into him. And thirdly, there's the door that leads to knowledge. And that all starts with the Forge. We see Bernard and Dolores in the facility. And we see Bernard watching Dolores as she walks through the Forge. We see Dolores putting in a control module into the Forge. And it's pretty clear that this is Abernathy. We saw her have Abernathy's brain capsule a couple episodes earlier. And what is in Abernathy is all of the guest data as well as the key to unlocking the Forge. And I believe Dolores hopes to also save her father. That's why an alliance between Bernard and Dolores could be useful, because Dolores needs Bernard to help her save her father. We also see Bernard standing in a chamber with a light bar around him. My best guess at this could be a human way to enter the simulation. It's a non-intrusive way that doesn't involve cutting your brain out, since if you were a human that would kill you. So this is another way to enter that simulation. But then we see them enter the Forge, and I have a couple ideas of what this could be. Either this is two different simulations. We have a cradle and we have a Forge. Or it is one gigantic Forge that involves all hosts and humans, as well as Westworld and the outside world, because we see them jump back and forth from Westworld to a modern setting. It could also be an Inception type deal, where everything in the Forge are memories from William. That we have the Westworld park, but then we're also going to have William's home. We're going to have James Delos' home. The testing site for James Delos' fidelity. All these different modern settings because they're products of William's memory. But we see Dolores and Bernard in Sweetwater. And Dolores ends up looking at herself. And what's funny here is that this simulated Dolores could lead Dolores and Bernard to their simulated selves testing for fidelity. There could be another control module for Bernard in the Forge that is more like Arnold than he is. Which raises the question that the Bernard that wakes up on the beach might not actually be Bernard. But that's just speculation. But then we see James Delos almost psychotic again. And either this is James Delos not being able to accept this reality, or it could somehow be the James Delos that we saw with Bernard and Elsie. I always said that I thought James Delos finding out that his kids were dead, That was the suffering necessary to push him to consciousness. But the reason he was psychopathic is because everything was taken from him. The things that made James Delos who he was were now all gone. And if that could somehow be transferred through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, then he could also be in this area. Or it could be transferred to a book. But then we also see Dolores and Bernard in the modern forge. We see a different looking James Delos in the facility. And in the background we see a woman in a black dress. And this could be Dolores. Seeing as it's essentially William's forge, it could be a fond memory that he had. Especially since he saw her last episode. And we also see Dolores and Bernard looking for answers in many different areas. We see them in the James Delos Fidelity apartment, where I'm sure together they're learning vividly about the process of transferring one from human to host. And then they also make it to some type of party. And I think that this is a party that we've already seen. Either it was 30 years ago with Logan and young William, or it's the party that we just saw, the moments before Juliet died. So I think it would be interesting for Dolores to learn more about William. And it seems like Logan is walking them through the forge to learn more information. And it would be really cool if this was the party that we saw last episode, because William saw Dolores in his head. But it would be funny if this episode she was actually there through the simulation. But there is some importance here of Logan, and I'm not necessarily sure why. I understand that he's in the forge, but I'm not 100% sure how he serves the plot. We also see a scene of him with James Delos, his father, and they're dressed differently. Logan's not wearing what he was wearing when he was escorting Dolores and Bernard. So I think this could be a disconnected scene. Whereas the audience, we just think that it's a scene between Logan and his father, but really it's them in the simulated environment, which we would learn theoretically later in the episode. But what's key here is that they make it to a modern library, and it's full with almost an infinite amount of books. And we see Dolores reading through these books, and it's clear that this could be the weapon. It is unlimited knowledge on every person who's ever entered the park. I think that each book is a person. Everything on their character, who they are, and the choices that they make. And I believe that these books are hand-carved, and we also see that in this trailer. So I think what's interesting with this is that we see a book on every single character, including William. And Dolores could leverage that a ton to give her the upper hand when she's fighting the humans. And we'll see if William goes there too, because he is going to be in the forge. So it will be very interesting to see what he does in there. But moving on, a couple of disconnected scenes, we see Bernard asking Ford for his help, and Ford is standing over a skeleton. So we see that Bernard and Ford are going to be working on a body. I think that this is William's body, but it could be another's. And the reason why I think Bernard is asking Ford for help is because him as a person can't do it, because he's going to have to do awful things to get where he has to be. So I think Ford will help him, and that will involve what happened in episode 1. All the bodies floating, and Bernard admits that he killed them. And that's because he couldn't do it. He gave Ford the control to do so. And we see Bernard flooding the valley with dead hosts there. And then we see him willingly lay down, almost like he wants to be a distraction, so all the hosts can prepare in their new world. So I'm very interested to see what they find in the present. Bernard is currently a prisoner, and they're going back to the forge. And at another point, Charlotte seems to find herself as a host. So I'm very interested to see the implications of that, as well as what they find in the forge. But that's it for me, everybody. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I want to hear your theories and thoughts on what will happen in this upcoming episode. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.